Well, hi everybody. Welcome, welcome. Add my welcome to Susan's. I am Melissa C. I'm a recovered compulsive overeater. I'm in New York and I'm really happy to be here tonight. Happy to be back in the beginning of the book. And welcome all the new people. I hope that you're able to find help, right? That's the purpose of this, that to get good information and in a loving and supportive environment. So hopefully that's what we're providing for you. Um, so I'll give you like a quick little background of who I am, and then I'll jump right into the topic, to the chapter. I have suffered from compulsive overeating. I think my whole life. I think I was born a compulsive eater. I've always had an unnatural, unusual response to food. I was always in battle with food. I was always aware that I wanted to eat more than everyone else around me, that the amounts that I ate were way larger than anyone else around me. I felt extreme shame about the amount of food I wanted to eat. And I was either doing everything I could to not eat what I really wanted. And it was always an effort to lose weight. Really, every time I would attempt to put the food down, my goal was so that I could look like I was normal. So I could look like I didn't have this problem. And there were periods of my life where I was able to do that. Um, and then I couldn't. I just couldn't. It was always followed by a still worse relapse, right? Every period that I put the food down, that I would lose some weight, I always went back to the food. And once I eat, I have no ability to moderate or control it. And so where that led me was over 300 pounds after a lifetime of dieting, of trying to do everything. I just reached a point where I was like, I can't do it anymore. I just was done. I couldn't stop, and I couldn't keep myself from starting again. And so I reached over 300 pounds, and shortly thereafter, I reached a desperation like I'd never, reached before, and I became entirely willing to do anything to recover. Um, and thankfully, there's a solution for people like us. And if you are entirely willing to do anything, we have a recipe. We have a step by step set of directions that will lead you to have a relationship with God that can remove this problem. And so for me, I've been relieved of over 160 pounds for a number of years. It's going to be 11 years this month. And I've had a spiritual awakening. Like God entered my heart and changed me. That's really what happened. And God's entry into my heart turned me into someone whose true desire. I've always liked to talk. I mean, that's been me from the time I was a child. But today I actually feel like I have something to say, and it turned me into someone who's, I don't just say this because I want to hear the sound of my own voice, but it's because God changed my heart. And I really, really want to carry this message because I know that it works, right? And it's my great desire to do this. So I'm gonna jump. That's like me in a nutshell, right? And I'm gonna jump into the doctor's opinion now because it's full of important information. So if you open up your book on XXV, right in the first paragraph, it says, "Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health." So the convincing testimony is a witnessing of people's return to health. So, and that's what's convincing. So what is seen is the great convincer. It's not even so much the words of the person, but it's some change that occurs in them that other people can notice, can see. And I'd say for me, that's really good news because I've had a substantial physical transformation. And often I show my pictures, right? I'm not going to do it tonight, but I often show my pictures because that's the convincing testimony for many people. I say like I had a visual representation of what it means to have an experience with the miraculous. And if you've had a visual miracle, you kind of want to show it to people. You're like, hey, because this is the testimony. But I have to say that my testimony is also the way I show up in the world today. It's very different from how it was before. It's noticeably different to the people in my life. Second paragraph says this, to whom it may concern. It starts off, there's a letter, and it says, to whom it may concern. And I'll tell you what it says in my book. You might consider doing this yourself. I wrote, Dear Melissa, because this letter concerns me. This letter, I like to read it as though this doctor is writing it to me because I'm the concerned. I have concerns, and I would say write your own name here. Um, Read it like it's written to you. In the third paragraph, it talks about being a competent businessman of good earning capacity, but still a type that he had come to regard as hopeless. So you can be competent in your business, good earning capacity and still be hopeless. And I think even more in the disease of compulsive overeating. We can kind of, I never missed a mortgage payment. I went to work. I didn't always go to work great, but I was able to go to work. I never got pulled over for a DWI. No one ever threatened taking custody of my children. I looked competent, but I was still a type that I could, come to regard as hopeless. Um, Hopeless meaning of my own power, I cannot do this. That's what it means to really be hopeless. You know, um, and then it goes on to say, as part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. So we're rehabilitated by working with others. That's part of how we become new people. And, we're told here, tell the newcomer, impress upon them that this is the requirement. In fact, you tell them in one of the first conversations. Before, for me, when I work with a sponsee, I give people I give them like three pre-assignments just to sort of determine, are they willing? And are they willing to do it the way that I do it? Are they gonna, you know, are they gonna relate to being able to do it this way? Um, and because a lot of times people call and they're like, I'm willing. But you really don't know you're willing until you're given something to do, and then you can kind of see if they're willing, right? But one of the last questions that I ask someone before we go through it is I ask them, are you gonna pass this on? Are you willing to agree that when you get out from under, you will pass what's given to you? Because I don't want anybody to think that I tricked them. I'm not gonna hide the terms of our agreement. Um, you know, this is a 12-step program. It is not an 11-step program. Sponsoring is not reserved for the elite. It's for all of us. We're all elite. Anybody that gets out from under I believe has a moral obligation to pass it on. So we tell people right away, like that's what it's going to be. Because working with others is how we get well and it's how we stay well, right? And it says, I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. So this is a program for people who have exhausted every other, right? That's why they call it the last house on the block. People don't often turn up at a meeting of Overeaters Anonymous without having tried some other things before, lots of things before. And I would say for me, what were the other methods that had failed completely? Mostly diets. They were diets, right? And here's the thing with diets: they all work. They work exactly as intended. If you eat less food, right? And you move more, you will lose weight. Here's the thing, they work until they no longer work, right? Until I stop because on my own power, I can't adhere to them. So they fail me completely, right? Um, and I always suggest to people, it's a good idea to list your methods. Like, write down all the methods you've tried because that becomes the great convincer. Are you really willing to do all this? Well, you're probably going to be a lot more willing if you tried a list this long, right? And what I found out when I started listing my methods is I have these horrible methods that make no sense. And I have tried them over and over and over and over again. Somehow they didn't work the first time, the third time, the fourth time, the 10th time, but the 27th time, maybe they're just going to work. And that's really where I was with this. On page XXVI, you may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Okay. This letter that the doctor's writing, the doctor wrote, gave them credibility. He was talking about drunks. He was saying, let these drunks come into the hospital, let them help other drunks, and you can rely on anything they say about themselves. Okay, that to me is mind blowing. That is really testimony to how this works because it's one thing that to rely on anything I say, right? But anything I tell you about myself, like I, never used to be honest about who I was. I couldn't, just didn't seem to have the capacity. But when we recover, our word is good. We begin to have a very close relationship with humility, so that when we say things that we're not proud of about ourselves, we're still able to tell the truth about ourselves, right? And here especially, you know, relying on anything they say was part of how they were able to help other people, right? They brought their experience. Our experience is really crucial in working with other people. So then it goes on to talk about the body of the alcoholic, right? That the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. And it did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality or were outright mental defectives, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may, of course, mean little, but as ex problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. So, our bodies are abnormal. That's what the doctor's opinion is telling me, that my body is not normal. And if I don't stress this, then I am neglecting to share crucial information as a sponsor, right? Or as a possible sponsor, or as just a fellow. I'm giving the newcomer incomplete information if I don't talk about the allergy of the body. And while I'm not an allergy specialist and I don't have the results of anyone's blood work, I know that this explanation is the only one that makes sense. I have never been able to eat two cookies. Like, I know what a portion is. I remembered being a young girl, I would go to my grandmother's, and my grandmother was very disciplined. And after dinner, she would make a cup of tea for me. She'd make me her a cup of tea, and you would get two cookies. I could never eat two cookies. When I would stay at my grandmother's house, you know what I did? I would have to wait until my grandmother went to sleep. And then I would have to carefully tiptoe, you know, and go into the cupboards and get more cookies. And it wasn't that my grandmother was mean or trying to restrict me or punish me. It was it was not healthy, in her mind, to eat more than 2 cookies. Therefore, she was gonna make sure that her grandchildren were healthy and not eat more than 2 cookies. And I could never abide by that because something happens inside me. When I eat certain foods, whether it's cookies or ice cream, you name it, I know what those foods are for me. Chances are you know what those foods are for you. Something happens inside of me. So, what do we do? Well, we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as an altruistic plane. So, yep, this is a spiritual solution where we start thinking about other people, where we start practicing self sacrifice and helping others. But we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. So, yeah, my solution is spiritual and altruistic. We find God by doing unselfish works. That's how we form a relationship with God. But this notion of a hospitalization for the alcoholic who's very jittery and befogged, you know, what I say is I never went to a rehab. I didn't have to go to a hospital. But I do believe that we can create our kind of own outpatient treatments for one another. And I like to call it the hospitalization period, where we put up some tight boundaries, tight restrictions between us and the outside world and the food. So that why? Not so that we can stay in isolation, safe and protected from food in a little bubble for the rest of our lives, but so that we can get cleared, so that we can get some you know, make some headway into the steps without all the outside distractions. So, what does that mean? Tight parameters with a lot of structure and support. Hospitalization doesn't mean they stick you in the hospital and nobody comes and sees you, right? It means you get care, you get help, you get support while you're while you're cleaning out, while you're drying out. So what does that mean? I would say like hospitalization period, you're probably best bet not to be going like on vacation, going out to restaurants, doing a lot of outside distracting things because you really want to focus on getting the food down, right? And we do that with a lot of help. I've had people, in early abstinence who we're struggling to go to the supermarket. I mean, this is a common thing. And some people, I would just say, hey, while you're there, make some phone calls so that you're not walking through the market alone. I've actually accompanied people to the supermarket, via Zoom, via uh, what's it called? Like on the phone together, like FaceTiming. I've walked with a person through the hospital, through the supermarket because they were afraid to go alone, right? Do whatever you have to do to keep yourself so that you're safe. You're not kind of throwing yourself in the midst of where all the food is. Of course, we don't have to do that for the long haul. I can go to any supermarket I want at any point in time, and I don't need to be on FaceTime with anybody to do it. Early recovery, we need a lot of help, right? Um, but it says here that more often, right? More often, a man's brain needs to be cleared out before he's approached, and I love that idea of more often than not, right? Because you have a better chance, right? It says a better chance of accepting what we have to offer if you're clean, if you're cleared out. And I don't know about you all, but if I have something fatal, I want the best possible chance of getting well, right? So the best possible chance is to do everything in your power, in your own power, to keep the food down. On XXVII, it says that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. So I might understand that I will need another moral code, right? That's different from the one that I've been living with. And we do find out a particular code that we get. We get this new moral code. It's called love and tolerance, right? It's different from the other ones that we may have had. And yet I can't apply it with my own intellect. That's what it says here. Like on my own, I can't follow this new code. Just like I knew what healthy eating looked like, right? Just like when I was a little girl and my grandmother said 2 cookies, I knew that that made sense. I knew what that looked like. I just couldn't do it, right? So I knew what honesty was. I've always known what honesty was. I know what it means to be unselfish, but I can't live within the boundaries of my own morals. On my own power, I struggled to live within my own moral code, right? Um, I need a higher power. I need a relationship with God to help me live in agreement with my morals. The addict knows right from wrong, right? It's not like, oh, you really need to inform that addict about what's right and what's wrong. They know what's right and wrong. They just can't abide by those rules. You know, Lack of knowledge is not my dilemma. It's lack of power. My dilemma is lack of power. So XXVII says the unselfishness of these men as we've come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive and their community spirit is inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. You know, Unselfishness, entire absence of profit motive. If somebody is charging you, if somebody is soliciting you as a life coach, as a paid sponsor, as a wellness coach, that's not this program. And that is not the way we carry the message. This week, I heard someone say, and I love it, we do it for free and for fun. For free and for fun. That's the earmarks of someone who has had a spiritual awakening. That's how we do it. And why do we do it? Why do we labor long and wearily in this alcoholic field? Because we believe in ourselves, but even more in the power, capital P for me, which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. And I'll just tell you, that is not melodramatic, back from the gates of death. Where my disease had me at the end was I had dangerously high blood pressure. I needed to have a hysterectomy. I was really in a bad way. In fact, by the time they were able to give me that hysterectomy, I needed to have 2 transfusions because I had lost so much blood. But they didn't want to give me a hysterectomy because my blood pressure was so high. Why? Because my weight was out of control. Why? Because I couldn't stop eating. Even knowing I needed a hysterectomy, even knowing I had dangerously high blood pressure, I couldn't stop. I would lay in bed at night. The doctor warned me that you're probably not going to make it out of your 40s because someone who weighs what you weigh, whose numbers look like your numbers, they don't live. These people don't live. And I would lay in bed at night and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I really felt like I was weeks away from a stroke. I really do. And I would cry myself to sleep because my kids were across the hall. And the thought of leaving my children broke my heart. And yet, brokenhearted, I would go downstairs and eat. Like I couldn't get out of this. So why do I do this work? Because God saved me. When I say like I've been rescued, I don't say that lightly. I know that I was rescued. And I believe that I have a responsibility and a pleasure to help with the rescuing of still others. That's why we do this work. And I'm not alone in that. I've got good friends here, enthusiastic, can't wait to do this work to help others. By the way, if you want to know what does it mean to have a spiritual awakening, that is a great way that you can tell. Because people who have a spiritual awakening, they're like, all of a sudden they're like, oh, I know someone who needs help. I gotta call this person. I'm gonna call this person and tell them about the meeting, or I'm gonna call this person. I want to help them. It's like you can't help but start helping others, right? That's why we do this. So, right, and it repeats again that, of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor. And it often requires a definite hospital procedure. So it's mentioned again, right? In this in this chapter, it's mentioned again. I needed help to put the food down so that I could get some clarity. Food was my master. I needed someone to help me get a relationship with another master, right? With the master. On XXVIII, it says the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. So, when I discussed with you all my physical problems, I couldn't solve it. It was piling up on me, right? And I couldn't solve it. So, the phenomenon of craving it talks about, it's limited to this class. It doesn't occur in the average temperate drinkers. Average temperate eaters, by the way, they can overeat sometimes. They overeat on Thanksgiving. They overeat, they go out to dinner and they might overdo it. They might overdo it on Super Bowl Sunday, right? But they don't keep on doing it all night long. They reach a point where they're done, where they're satiated. What I've seen happen is I'll go out to dinner. We just did it this weekend, and my husband, we met his cousins out, and my husband drank too much and he ate too much, right? And he went, "Oh man, that was so good." I don't do that when I eat too much and drink too much. For me, it never hits the spot. I say I have a spot that can't be hit. I have never eaten alcoholically and said, "Ah, that was awesome." Never, right? Because for me, once I start, I cannot stop, right? I go out, I wouldn't leave anything over on my plate. And I would be like looking at what anyone else left on their plate, regardless of how stuffed I was. Normal people eat. And from what I've been told, normal people eat, all kinds of foods. And with each bite they take, the desire for more gets diminished. So when my friends say that they are craving an ice cream, they go for an ice cream. The third bite in, they're getting satisfaction. By the time the ice cream is done, they're done. For me, I'm just getting started. When I eat certain foods, what it does for me, the desire for more increases. And not just with certain foods. What I found out is alcoholic food behaviors. So if I would eat to the point where I'm stuffed, that stuffed signals me to be more stuffed, to go for more, which for me is why weighing and measuring my food is a pretty good idea. You know, um, it kind of helps from that happening, right? Um, and you know, if I'm thirsty, here's a good example someone shared with me one time. When I'm thirsty and I pour myself a big glass of water, I don't. need to use willpower to keep me from drinking all the water in the house, right? I don't even finish the glass half the time, right? I drink the water and I'm satiated and I don't need any help to tell me to leave the water alone. I've reached my point of saturation. And I think that's how it is with normal temperate eaters with the food. That is not my experience with alcoholic foods, right? So here it says XXVIII, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. This paragraph is so rich. There's so much I want to tell you here. First of all, frothy emotional appeal doesn't work, it seldom suffices. So if you appeal to a compulsive overeater from an emotional standpoint, don't even bother. It's not going to work. And the example I always give here, I have a very specific, I have lots of examples, but this one really hits close to home. I had my mother in law came over when my children were babies. Remember, I was in a bad way. And my mother in law came over and she sat me down at my kitchen table and she began to tell me about how she lost her own mother when she was a little girl. Her mother died, not a result of this disease. Her mother died of cancer, actually. And then she said it was the worst thing in the world to lose a mother as a little girl. It was horrible. And then she said, and as bad as that was, when her son, my husband, was a little boy, his father died. He was 7 or 8 years old when his dad died. And she said it was horrible. Not only did it happen to her, but then she saw it happen to her children. And it was just devastating. And this woman, who's very stoic, very tough, started to cry. And she said, Melissa, I'm afraid you're going to do the same thing to my grandchildren. And I mean, talk about emotional appeal. It didn't work. It didn't work. You know what happened? I got angry at her. I was mad. How dare you, was what I thought. How dare you come to my house and tell me what I should do? And after she left, you know what I did? I ate. I ate. So frothy emotional appeal doesn't suffice. It also doesn't suffice as one compulsive overeater talking to another. I will never say to somebody here, what are you doing? You're killing yourself. Open up your eyes. Like, stop it. You're gonna die. Instead, I share my experience. I don't tell you that you're gonna die. I'm telling you I was dying, right? That's what carries depth and weight. When we see someone and we hear their story and we see they're no longer living that way, that's what that's a message of depth and weight. And then the end part of that paragraph says that their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves. Here's the clincher: if they are to recreate their lives. So, this is not a program that you're going to fit around your life. Forget it. If you're here thinking everything in my life needs to stay exactly the same, Melissa, show me how to fit recovery around my life. No, this is a program for people whom all other methods have failed, which means this is a program for people who need to recreate their lives. I needed a new life. I needed a brand new life, and of my own power, I couldn't do it. I needed a relationship with God. I needed new ideals that were not grounded in me, that were grounded in God. That God was going to help me form some new ideals, some new ways that I was going to have to live my life so that my life could be new, so that I could get a brand new life. You know, um, next it talks about men and women drinking essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol, that the sensation is so elusive. There's a whole paragraph that we admit it's injurious. We cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks, drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they've succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, emerging remorseful. Oh, they pass through the well known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. And this is repeated over and over. And unless the person can experience an entire psychic change, basically, they need to be recreated. They need to be brand new people, new personalities. There's very little hope in this recovery. So we drink because the effect produced by food. I don't eat because I'm a foodie. That's not my reason. It's not because I like the taste and flavor of food. I might, but that's not why I eat. It's not for the texture, it's not for the presentation, it's not for the pretty plate. I get a hit and a buzz off of food, and I can actually feel that hit even before I would begin to eat it. In fact, for me, I remember being a little girl on the bus on the way home from school, knowing what was in the house. And I was already getting excited. I was already feeling different inside. Or I would be ready for a binge. I would go to the supermarket and my shopping cart would be overflowing with everything that I was going to get to eat. I could already start to feel something different happening inside of me. I was having a change before I even put a bite in my mouth. You know, um, I get a hit and a buzz off of food. And, um, you know, that sensation I get, that effect that I get, it's elusive. It escapes me. It's very quick. It does not last. It's in fact, as my eating took more serious proportions, I required more food to get that effect. And the effect was shorter. I couldn't stay, and it was less intense. It seemed like I needed more and more and more. And I know that it was hurting me. I would know that it was hurting me, and yet it seemed normal to eat that way. In my alcoholic, eating, it seemed normal to binge all weekend long. That seemed like a normal thing to do. Um, and if you're living that way, you know, your normal becomes relative to what you're doing. Normal is your normal. Um, and when I didn't eat, I was restless. I would say it like this: I was itchy on the inside. I would start just feeling off. I couldn't get settled. Couldn't quiet myself down. And what would happen is this: they talk about this addiction cycle, and I say it's actually an addiction spiral. I have a spiral written in my book, like that spiral design, because what would happen is I would get easily itchy, irritable, discontent. I was walking around that way all the time, so sensitive, so easily triggered. And I would get that feeling and I would have to eat, and I would have to eat a lot. And my binges got worse. They lasted longer, they took more serious proportions. And the time that I was emerging remorseful was happening fewer, longer and longer and longer. And that my binges got worse. I would emerge remorseful for like a second and then go back right out into the binge or just stay in that binge. And it was like my life, it was like a spiral. My life felt like a black dot in the middle, and I couldn't get out. I couldn't get out from under. You know, I've never emerged any other way but remorseful. Like I said, I've never had a binge and said, "Ah, awesome." And yet, every time that I planned a binge, I would say to myself, I just got to get it out of my system so that Monday I'll be able to do it. I kind of was thinking that Monday I was going to wake up and say, oh, okay, now I'm good. Now I'm ready to do business. But I've never emerged that way. Right. So I'm living in this tight spiral and I couldn't get out. And here's the good news. Now we're ready for the good news. An XXIX, it says, on the other hand, and strange as it may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, that very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems, he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for food, the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. Basically, follow the steps. Those are those are my rules. And why am I able, to suddenly find myself easily able to control my desire? Because my desire is not what it once was. I would say my desire used to be a tiger, right? And I would try to keep that tiger in a cage. That was that old kind of thing that they used to say. You have to take the tiger out of the cage 3 times a day and be able to safely get it back inside. Well, what if I can promise you that once you do these steps thoroughly, entirely, precisely, follow them, you don't have a tiger anymore. You have a kitten. A kitten. You can easily control that desire because it's not a strong desire. In fact, it's rare that I ever have a thought of food at all. And when I do, it's like, ugh, why would I want to do that? And it's over, right? So, a psychic change, that tight spiral that I was living in, what a psychic change does is it unravels the spiral and it just doesn't happen anymore. I'm just not there. I'm not living in a spiral. And it talks about many types do not responding to the ordinary psychological approach. I would say ordinary psychological approach, an ordinary diet approach. Because for me, it was an ordinary diet approach. I didn't respond to those. They didn't work for me. I'm not opposed to psychology or therapy. I think therapy and psychology are great. It doesn't work where this is concerned. It might work in other areas, doesn't work where my food problem is concerned. And it talks here about not holding, with those who believe that alcoholism is all about mental control. This is not all about mental control. I have an allergy of the body. I can't control it with my mind. If I could have, I would have. Because I have other things that I've been able to control with my mind, right? I have my master's plus additional, I've like a double master's. And I've been able to use willpower to study. I've been able to, I like to shop. I can spend too much and then I get the bill and I'm like, oh crap, I better dial it down and keep myself in check. I don't require a psychic change to do that. I respond to, I can use some mental control. Um, so here it talks about, the classification of alcoholics. And it goes into this whole thing about all these different classifications that, there's all different ways we can break it up. And for the purpose of time, I'm going to cut to the chase after all these different classifications. Because here's the thing. All of these people have one symptom in common. So no matter what you're like here, right? We got one important symptom that's in common. Cannot start drinking, cannot start eating without developing the phenomenon of craving. That phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy, which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. So I'm going to tell you this, right? I am a distinct entity. I am different from other people. I think, if you want to have a visual of this, you take a piece of paper, you fold it in half, and you make that line nice and crisp, right? And on one side of the page are people, frothy emotional appeal doesn't work for us. We have an allergy of the body. We have to recreate our lives. I have to have ideals grounded in a power greater than myself. I have to weigh and measure. For me, I got to weigh and measure my food. For me, I cannot indulge in my alcoholic food or alcoholic food behaviors. I can't manage and control it, right? I've got a lot of other tools that help me, know that this is a side of the page that I live on. And I'm okay when I live on that side of the page. My great problem is that I try to sometimes flatten that page out, smooth it over, but that crease is permanent. If I try to get on the other side of the page, I'm in trouble. I need to know who I am and what I am. And that's really what it means to fully concede to your innermost self. I cannot tell anyone else here if they're a distinct entity, but I can tell you that I am, you know, and I know that there has never been, by any method, eradicated. This allergy of the body, I believe I've got it for life. I'm not interested in testing the theory to find out if my relationship with God is so strong today. Could I eat ice cream? Could I eat those chocolate cookies? I'm not interested. I don't really want to test the theory. I'm pretty okay, happily knowing that I'm on this side of the page, right? So, um, you know, I think if you're distinct, you're recognizably different in nature from something else of a similar type. It means we're physically separate. We're readily distinguishable and clearly apparent, unmistakable, definite. And I think what becomes dangerous for some people is that once you stop looking different, meaning people lose weight, they start feeling successful and strong and happy and things are going well in their life, they start thinking, maybe I'm not a distinct entity, right? And they start thinking they can put their toe on the other side of the page. And that's when we're at the greatest danger, I think. So, what's the solution? Well, if I know I can't stop once I start and I can't keep myself from starting again, then I need a psychic change. And I know I can't give myself that needed change. What do I do then? Well, the doctor's opinion is going to give me two examples of doomed people who have experienced miracles of healing. And the purpose is to pique your curiosity, is to get you interested. Can I get a miracle of healing? Can this happen for me? And one story, they talk about this guy who was hopeless, right? He lost everything worthwhile in life and said he was hopeless. And he put down the alcohol and he followed the plan in this book. And what happened for him was he went from that trembling, despairing, nervous wreck and emerged self reliant and content. Didn't even seem like the same person at all. And that's my personal experience as well. I was beaten down in terrible physical shape. I couldn't even make eye contact when I went to that first meeting after being gone for so many years. I couldn't look people in the face. I was terrified. I was filled with anxiety. And that is not who I am today, right? And the next story talks about someone who made his own diagnosis and determined he was hopeless. That's a prerequisite too. You need to diagnose yourself and determine if you are helpless, if you are hopeless, without hope. And he was determined to die, but he was rescued, right? Following his physical rehabilitation, cleaned out of the alcohol. He thought it wasn't going to work because he thought his problems were so much greater than anybody else. But he became sold on the ideas in this book and he was completely transformed. The doctor's opinion ends by telling us to read this book And even if your intention is to ridicule, right? Maybe you might wind up praying. And I think that's true for so many of us. We come here annoyed, somewhat laughing about the God thing, and we wind up becoming people who pray. And I would tell you, this entire program is really a prayer. I think the entire book, all 12 steps are a prayer. Because what is prayer? Prayer is a petition. Prayer is asking God to intervene on your behalf, to help you. Well, what are the steps? The steps are a set of measured increments where each step and increment we ask a higher power to enter our lives and remove this problem from us. Pretty similar to a prayer. So the directions really are. If you're going to stay, you remain to pray. And with that, I'll pass. Thanks.